Are you struggling to come up with a profitable book idea for your self-publishing business? What if I told you that the perfect book already exists and you can use it for free? In today's video, I'm going to show you how to turn timeless, ready-made classics from the public domain into profits for you on Amazon KDP. We're going to cover what exactly public domain books are, some really creative examples of public domain publishing done right. You're going to learn how to spot the books with the highest earning potential, and then stick around to the end because I'm going to be covering the 4 public domain publishing mistakes that could get your KDP account flagged, and you do not want to make those mistakes. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Rachel Harrison's son, and I help people turn simple book ideas into passive income streams. So first off, what is a public domain book? This is a book whose copyright has either expired or it was never protected by copyright in the first place. Now, whether something's in the public domain actually differs according to what country you're in. But if you're in the United States, generally speaking, if the book was published before 1978, it's usually protected for 95 years. If the book was created after 1977, then it's protected for the life of the author plus 70 years. In this year, 2025, generally the cutoff for published works is anything published in 1929 or earlier. Those books are now in the public domain in the United States. So a few examples of fiction titles that are now in the public domain are Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. Couple of nonfiction examples, we've got Walden by Henry David Thoreau and The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles. Now this content is free to use, free to adapt, and importantly for you, it is free to sell legally. Now I used to advise my students against publishing anything that's in the public domain, mainly because I just saw a lot of really poor, low effort examples, and a lot of that really does exist on Amazon KDP. But recently I've seen some really creative, really high value ways of doing public domain publishing, and so I've kind of changed my mind about it. So if you're wondering why you should consider publishing public domain work, there are a few really good reasons. First of all, there's minimal to no writing required. The bulk of this work has already been created. That's great because it means the barrier to entry is low, but the creative potential is really high. There's also huge libraries of this work available for you, tons of material, and every single year, hundreds of new works are being added to the public domain, meaning it's going to be really hard to run out of material that you can potentially use. Also, there's already existing demand for this content. People are still actively searching for and purchasing all of this work on Amazon and in other places. But of course, the main question is, does Amazon KDP actually allow the publishing of public domain work? And the answer to that is yes. Now, there are a couple of restrictions to be mindful of. First off, and I think most importantly, Amazon really prefers differentiated works. So it's not enough to just do a straight up copy and paste. A lot of people do this and you can get away with it, but to my mind, there's really no point. You want to be able to create something that's really high value so that you can get great reviews and sell a lot of copies. You're not gonna be able to get good reviews and make a lot of sales just by rehashing, just regurgitating something that's already been published. Now, there are 3 ways that Amazon advises that you can differentiate your work. So the first one is annotations, and that really is just a fancy way of saying add text. So that could be a study guide, it could be a new written introduction, it could be a literary critique, biography, some other type of creative text, and we'll get into a few really creative examples of what that might look like in a minute. The second way to differentiate is through illustrations. So if you're an illustrator, or even if you're someone who's just really handy with AI image generators, you can create accompanying illustrations that go along with the work. The third way is by offering an original translation. So if there's a work in another language and you want to translate it to English, or if the work is in English and you want to translate it into another language, that's the third way that Amazon will allow you to differentiate that work. And then something to note, when you publish your edition, you're going to have to include that in the title in parentheses, either annotated, illustrated, or translated. So for example, if you wanted to reproduce Pride and Prejudice and you included a new introduction that was written by you, rather than having the title be Pride and Prejudice and then in parentheses with an introduction by Tiffany Gordon, That's not going to be allowed. Instead, what you would have to do is have your title say Pride and Prejudice and then have annotated in parentheses in the title as well. A couple more things. when you're setting up your title through KDP, there's going to be a checkbox where you tick off either I have the copyright for this work or this is a public domain work. You're going to have to tick off that box that this is a public domain work. And when you do that, you'll notice you're only going to be eligible for the 35% royalty. Now, this I think is completely fair considering the bulk of the work has already been created by somebody else. But if you create a beautiful, high-value edition of this public domain work, and it's a book that is actually in demand and sells, you are still going to make money off of this. So I'd like to show you a couple of examples of public domain publishing done really, really well, just so that you can get the wheels turning for yourself. So I just love this first example. It's Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, but they've updated it. Now it's Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, a book-to-table classic. So they've created a beautifully updated hardcover. They've turned the interior full color, but the differentiator here is that they've included some complimentary tea time recipes. I thought this was just such a unique and creative way to elevate an already fantastic work, this classic work that so many people love. And this would be an absolutely brilliant collector's item for anyone who's into Jane Austen. The second example I'm going to show you, this was the whole impetus for me creating this video. I was at the library with my kids a couple of weeks ago, and I came across this illustrated version of a classic Robert Frost poem. So it's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. So this illustrator, Vivian Meinecker, has taken this classic Robert Frost poem and just added her own illustrations. The illustrations are absolutely beautiful. And you can see she's created something really astounding here. I went onto her website and it looks like she's also done the same thing for one or two others as well. She's also done The Road Not Taken, also by Robert Frost. So what I love about what this illustrator has done, not only has she actually elevated the original work by pairing it with these incredible illustrations, she's actually targeting a completely different audience, which is kids. Most kids aren't reading Robert Frost poems, but it's now presented in this beautiful way with these illustrations that make it more accessible for kids. So I just think this is an absolutely brilliant example of public domain publishing done really well. So let's talk about the steps that you need to take if you want to publish one of these public domain works yourself. But first, if you want to learn how you can start making money with your public domain books or any low or medium content books, then download my free guide, which I've linked to down below. 3 steps to publishing your first low content book in less than a day. So the first step, if you want to publish your own public domain work, is to just brainstorm some ideas. So you want to go to some trusted sources to find books that are actually in the public domain. So Project Gutenberg, Google Books, HathiTrust, the Internet Archive, Library of Congress. I'll leave links to all of those down in the description below. You do want to always double check that the books are actually in the public domain. They should be clearly marked public domain on the listing. Once you've got a short list of ideas, head over to Amazon to make sure that those books are actually in demand. So type in the name of that book in Amazon search bar, scroll down to the book details, check out the bestsellers rank. If that bestsellers rank is around 100 or even 200,000 or less, you know that that book is selling at least semi-regularly and there's a potential there for you to make some money. You can also use a paid tool like Publisher Rocket. Publisher Rocket is great because it shows you the actual estimated number of monthly searches a particular book is getting. So you'll know if 100 people are searching for it versus 1,000 or 10,000. And that's a great way for you to gauge just how in demand that particular book is. The most important step is figure out how you're going to add value. How are you going to actually elevate this original work into something that's even better? So you'll want to think about things like designing a new custom cover, maybe updating the formatting to make things a little bit more readable. Maybe you're using different fonts and things like that. Maybe you want to write an introduction or add a biography of the author, commentary, discussion, summaries, study guides. You can see from that previous example, they included recipes, which I thought was just so creative, illustrations, photographs, graphics, diagrams, maps. Just get really creative here and think about the reader, the person who's interested, a huge fan of that original work. What would just be the perfect complement for them? And if you're having trouble, ask ChatGPT. I'd love to republish X public domain work. I want to make it incredibly valuable to a fan of the original. Please give me some examples of the type of additional content that I can include to make this really compelling. So I did that a couple of days ago with ChatGPT. I just fed it a few names of classic public domain works, and I'll just share with you some of the responses I got because I thought they were really creative. So the first one is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And it suggested that I could include some build your own monster STEM activities. It's telling me that the concept is a Gothic classroom edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with some DIY STEM projects like creating a simple electrical circuit or inventing your own monster character with prompts. I thought that was really cool. The next one, the poems of Emily Dickinson, plus a guided poetry coloring book. So a creative meditative book pairing Dickinson's short poems with hand-drawn illustrations and floral patterns for coloring, plus space for readers to write their own poems. Again, really cool example. Then we've got Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass plus Nature Walk reflections. So a poetic nature journal pairing select Whitman poems with guided outdoor activities like leaf rubbing, sketching, reflections. And then the final one here that I thought was cool was Grimm's Fairy Tales plus shadow work journal. So shadow work journals I've seen really kind of pick up steam over the last couple of years. The concept here is dark fairy tales paired with introspective journaling prompts about personal fears, childhood beliefs, and self-reflection, all in a mystical, moody design. And then your audience here would be adults into self-discovery. So I think there's a couple things that are working about these examples, and they're things that you should think about too if you want to give this a go on your own. So we're taking the timeless classic and then we're pairing it with something that's popular right now, like a prompted journal or a coloring book. The second thing is that we're retargeting these classic works to a different audience. So we saw that with the Robert Frost book earlier. Generally speaking, Robert Frost poems are not targeting children, but the illustrator of that book has turned it into a children's book. So similarly, with this Grimm's fairy tale idea, kind of done the opposite. We've taken something that's geared towards kids, and then we've repurposed it and geared it more towards adults. So keep those things in mind as well. Really think about who your target audience is, and can you make the target audience different than the original work's target audience, just to give it a unique spin. So before we get into the 4 mistakes to avoid, if you're really finding this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. All right, mistakes to avoid. Number 1, uploading a public domain work to Amazon KDP or anywhere else without making any improvements. The number 1 thing you have to keep in mind if you're going to do one of these for yourself, you have to add value. You should be elevating this work. It's very tempting to just cash in on an already popular work, just do a cut and copy paste. You don't want to do that. You really want to add value. Mistake number 2, using content that isn't actually in the public domain. This is a huge deal. If you do that, you're essentially infringing on someone else's copyright, and that's grounds for KDP account termination, which you don't want to do. Whatever work you're thinking about using, make sure it is clearly labeled as in the public domain. And again, go back to the sources that I referenced earlier and that I've linked to down in the description below, and you'll be able to check for sure if that work is in the public domain. Third mistake is not checking off that public domain checkbox during setup when you're publishing your book. Again, if you don't check public domain and you check that you hold the copyright, that is inaccurate, and that could be cause to get your account terminated. Final mistake you want to avoid here is not double checking if it's in the public domain in your country. The public domain guidelines are actually different, whether you're in the United States or here in Canada, or if you're over in the UK or anywhere else. So make sure that you're checking that the work that you would like to use is in the public domain where you live. If you're looking for even more interesting and profitable ideas for your self-publishing business, check out this video on how to publish coffee table books. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.